This is the Ishi Weekly, the discipline of determined intent. I am Gareth Holebrook. Thought that leads to action, action that is thoughtful. In this podcast, I will explore the Ishi spiral through the lens of an ultra-endurance athlete, leadership coach, engineer, and farmer. The first few episodes will be excerpts from the book, the autobiographical sections, talking about Ironman, Coast to Coast, and other races I've taken part in. Enjoy. PerformO, persistence without distance. In early 2004, I was feeling restless in full-time employment. I was working as a program manager at Navman and had spent years building technology for consumer GPS products, including sports watches with Timex. The work was good and the people were smart, but I felt misaligned. I wanted to apply what I knew about products and technology to something I cared about deeply. Human performance had already taken hold of me. 2 years earlier, I had experimented with simulated altitude training. The effect was noticeable and convincing. I was already racing endurance events and understood what marginal gains meant over long distances. In January 2004, I raced my first half Ironman in Auckland, where BodyO2 was the naming sponsor. After the race, I spoke to the team at their tent and asked whether they planned to open in Christchurch, where I was living at the time. The team said no, but Mike, the franchisor, mentioned the company was looking for franchisees. I walked away, bought a coffee from a burger van, and thought about it for 10 minutes. Then I went back and asked for a business card. Within weeks, I initiated the franchise purchase. I was selling a house in the United Kingdom, and my move to New Zealand became permanent. I had capital available. The idea was seductive. Altitude training would be the entry point. The revenue would fund development of my own health and performance technology. By the end of March, I had resigned from Navman. On the 19th of April, I opened the doors to BodyO2 Christchurch. The speed of execution felt on brand and consistent with what I was planning. I told myself that the franchise was a revenue-generating entry point to a technology startup, and this is how startups work. This was my internal narrative, but in reality it was momentum unchecked by scrutiny. It was ungoverned momentum. At the time, I believed I had assembled a rare alignment of success factors. I had technical experience in sports hardware, credibility as an aspiring athlete, and access to a growing endurance market. One of the other franchisees was Nick Gill, now performance coach for the All Blacks, who was running the Hamilton studio while coaching the Chiefs rugby team. We discussed collaborations around wearable GPS devices for rugby players. The idea was ahead of its time, and I spoke with race organisers about timing and tracking systems. I applied for government funding. I stocked supplements and compression gear, breathing devices, and anything adjacent to performance. I went in hard. I sponsored events aggressively and spent on print, radio, and television. Social media was not yet a marketing channel. Marketing was expensive and blunt. I raced constantly under my own brand, became both a promoter and a product. Within 3 months, people were coming through the door, but most of them were using complimentary sessions. I had given away at sponsorship prizes. Conversion was weak, and retention was non-existent. By September, my cash flow was gone. I borrowed from the bank and finance companies and brought in an investor to buy time. I told myself winter was a problem and that the upcoming triathlon season would fix it. It did not. By the end of the year, the numbers were unmistakable. Revenue from the entire business was lower than a single salary. Nothing I tried made a difference. I did not stop. I had committed to the Coast to Coast and Ironman, racing while the business deteriorated. I framed the struggle as character building. I told myself that persistence was the price of legitimacy. I had read stories about founders surviving on the edge of bankruptcy and believed that this was the same thing. The narrative was powerful enough to override the data. In February 2005, a week before the Coast to Coast, the bank withdrew the credit line they had extended months earlier. I was insolvent. I finished the race, and Ironman anyway, carrying stress that I refused to acknowledge. I still had staff, and I believed something would shift. Following Ironman, I moved back to Auckland after being approached by Richard Mangnall, the Chief Ops Officer of Phytech, an Auckland-based noise-cancelling headphone company. He had been my boss at Navman in 2002 and offered me a contract role. The income allowed me to keep paying staff. One of them, Aaron, reduced her hours and accepted shares in lieu of pay. She effectively worked for free because she could see the reality that I was still denying. That arrangement lasted for 6 months. Eventually, the franchise holding company collapsed and its assets were sold to another franchisee. Legal conflict followed. I exited the franchise and continued under my own brand, PerformO. PerformO ran from 2006 to 2010. I used the original altitude equipment and later portable simulators that I'd helped develop. The simulators were prototypes and not robust enough for field use. They failed clients and failed me. I persisted anyway. By the time I closed the business following the 2008 global financial crisis, I had lost the best part of $1 million New Zealand dollars. The loss had been accumulating since the very first few months, but I had refused to stop. Most of my revenue was ultimately from retailing nutrition and clothing. My real reason to go into business, as a technology startup, was stillborn. I take full ownership for that outcome. The franchise, the market, the timing, and the global financial crisis all played roles, but none of them forced my decisions. Ego did. I wanted my endurance to mean something beyond sport. I wanted pain tolerance to be wisdom. I believed if I could suffer physically, then I could outlast a business reality. There was a period during this time when I was effectively homeless. I had sold everything. My old Navy shipmate, Mick Skelton, who was with me watching the Coast to Coast when Gurney finished in 2004, let me stay in a house he was renovating in Christchurch. There was no power and no water. He asked for nothing and expected nothing. John Justice, a close friend from the UK days, would order takeaway pizzas from Wellington and have delivered to me. Those gestures were both more than any investor conversation. I also need to mention Scotty Brown and Aidan Crean, who own Scotty Brown's Bike Emporium in Christchurch. Both helped promote my business along theirs and maintain my bikes while I couldn't afford to pay for them. Scotty raced in Ironman in 2005, the same year as me. Over the past 2 decades, I have purchased all but one of my bikes from them. In the same week that the bank pulled the plug, I met Thierry. We stayed connected through the years of instability and distance while I rebuilt. In 2006, she moved to Melbourne and chose to stay in touch. That continuity grounded me at a time when my own judgment had failed. The signals were detectable within 1 month. I ignored them because stopping felt like weakness, failure, and betrayal. I had violated Gaman's primary principle. Endurance became identity. Identity blocks perception. That pattern is common and rarely admitted. Persistence is celebrated, stopping is framed as weakness, and the ability to endure without noticing when endurance has become destructive is blindness reinforced by effort. My mistake was confusing suffering with progress and motion with meaning, not starting a business. What matured me was that what became visible once the grind ended, not the grind itself. That experience has shaped everything that's followed. It taught me that endurance must be governed and that intent without distance eventually collapses under its own weight. It remains one of the most costly and formative chapters of my life. Thanks for listening to the Ishi Weekly. Please subscribe and find more content on Substack and YouTube. Ishi, The Discipline of Determined Intent, is available on Amazon and Kindle.